Thank you very much again for joining us today morning. My name is Silvia Szőlősi. I am head of the University Strategy Office at Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, Hungary, which is one of the 9 CHARM-EU institutions working together in the CHARM-EU European University Alliance. And I'm very happy to host today's webinar, which is the first event of a series of webinars, of a 3-event webinar series, which is based on a joint project between Trinity College Dublin, the University of Barcelona, and Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, and it is carried out in the framework of a so-called CHARM-ED project, or a call, which is an offer, which is a call offering funding to support the development, enhancement, or redesign of higher education and lifelong learning activities across the CHARM-EU Alliance. We decided to open up today's webinar and the webinar series itself to a broader audience, not only colleagues working on the project directly, because we strongly believe that all that information and knowledge and practices that will be shared by our esteemed colleagues at Trinity College Dublin can be of great impact and great interest to a broad circle. This webinar series is touching upon the question of sustainability and embedding sustainability and approaches to sustainability into our education practices. I don't want to steal the floor from our main presenter. Let me give a warm welcome and introduction to Dr. Cicely Roche of Trinity College Dublin, and right away give her the floor. Just a few technical details about our today's webinar. This event is going to last for about 60 minutes with a lecture by Cicely at the beginning and the question and answer section at the end. Please note that the webinar is being recorded, which is for the sake of sharing it on the CHARM-EU website later on, so you can use it as a resource. While Cicely gives us the lecture, it's only the chat and the question and answer section that is available to our attendees. However, in the end, during the question and answer section, of course, we will enable camera and microphone for the attendees also. So please do not hesitate to post your questions into the question and answer section. But of course, you will have the opportunity to pose these questions if you want to in person, let's say so, in this digital world, in the end of the section. With any technical issues, please use the chat and we will be standing by to help you out. Dear Cicely, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Very much appreciated. And if I would add one thing with respect to the chat and Q&A, the chat in particular, I can see there are colleagues on the call. In many cases, perhaps I will say something that could have done with a bit more explanation. And please, my colleagues in Trinity that are well aware of the background and links, etc., please feel free to respond to chat questions as well. I love Sylvia's introduction. It is that ethos, that value system of partnership towards the goals that really has drawn me into the CHARM-EU and the CHARM-ED world. So it's wonderful to be here today, Sylvia, and being a speaker to kickstart our project, which is entitled Enacting Education for Sustainable Development, ESD, Spotlight on Teaching Practices for Exploring Worldviews, Perceptions and Values. And Sylvia mentioned that this is the first of 3 webinars, and webinar 2 will be led by the speakers, will largely be students, PhD students, who have absolutely partnered with us on our way and really have impacted not just on the project as a whole, but on me as an ESD fellow and on my colleagues. And the third webinar will be focus on a case study which we're using as Trinity Business School, because the outside view, the external impact, if you like, of the work done with staff development included that our Trinity Business School in September 24 and again in September 25 made education or made enacting sustainable development a core module compulsory for every incoming first-year student on each of their 5 programs, which means you've well over 500 students each year joining the higher education system and being exposed, if you like, and enabled to engage with sustainable development in a format that derived from this initial project that we're working with. I'm sure Sylvia will remind us at the end that those webinars are on Monday mornings on 19th of January and 16th of February. Acknowledgements, and I do want to begin with this to make sure we see and we recognize that the partnership is, of course, about Trinity, Budapest, and the University of Barcelona, and that we are supported by CHARM-ED funding key to support the development, enhancement, or redesign of higher education and lifelong learning activities across the CHARM-EU Alliance. But we're building on a lot of work that has been done, particularly across 2023 and 24 in Trinity. And we have introduced the background to how we came to be with this module, but there are a total of 6 ESD fellows who applied to be seconded to this particular project and remain committed to the whole ethos of it. And likewise, we have an internal, very competitive system for ESD interns, and Mariam, William, Freddie, and Tom very much became part of the process with us. Mariam will be one of the key speakers at webinar 2, now in her final year of a PhD in School of Law, related to gender equity in the Congo, which of course is the theme of our case. So I would add, however, that a wide range of students and staff actively engaged with and impacted positively on piloting continuous improvement workshops during late 23 and 24. And that work continues, but this particular project derives from that time. And I want to emphasize that when we talk about teaching and teaching practice, on those pilots, we had librarians hugely impacting on what we're doing, the staff from the Sustainability Office, Healthy Trinity, our Students' Union officers were absolutely engaged throughout the process and very supportive of what we were doing. And the continuation in 2025, you'll note that I come from the, if you like, the School of Pharmacy, which I've had a half-time position in for 15 years, having been out there, if you like, in the world of work for a couple of decades before that. But I'm in my 10th year with a position in the Centre for Academic Practice in Trinity, which sits in Trinity Teaching and Learning. So very much part of my base and my worldview comes from there. And during 2025, the open education resources, the videos, very much I want to pick out one colleague in the Centre for Academic Practice, and that's Kevin. And finally, work like this cannot survive in isolation. And I will emphasize in the first slides that it's fitted within not only Trinity's value system and strategies and our sustainability office, but also within national strategy and of course your EU and international strategy, because we derive from UNESCO, which gives us that global view one needs for a project such as ESD. But our work during 23 and 24 as fellows and interns, I must acknowledge, was funded by the National Forum for the Higher Education Authority, which in Ireland is our statutory body governing higher education, and their SATL, as we call it, Strategic Alignment of Teaching and Learning Enhancement Fund. So to stress that, it was supported from upstream all the way, and from within college, and it could not have been done without all of that. So just any partners, I know others are starting on these projects and others are very much within them and saying, what can they add from our experience? So that's just to set it in context. I think I introduced myself here as module coordinator for the Enacting ESD staff development module. And that's also important because when we applied to become ESD fellows, the other 5 you'll see from the slides later in the presentation are absolute experts within their fields, whether that was chemistry and geochemistry, organizational behavior, law, engineering, or psychology. Whereas I specifically felt that my background experience in curriculum design and my own research PhD within the School of Pharmacy from about 10 years ago, very much about the use of curriculum to enable and drive moral development, specifically moral reasoning, that there was a crossover between those two. I would not present myself as an expert in an aspect of be it planetary boundaries or the psychology or anything, rather that linchpin and perhaps representative of so many teaching colleagues in Trinity, and I suspect across the CHARM-ED Alliance. We're well-intentioned in this field, but relatively uninformed when it comes to the absolute expertise needed to underpin and drive global change. But we certainly have a role if we can upskill enough to do like what our colleagues in the business school have done, and upskilled enough to be able to give that holistic overview. So that's the key background to what we're about. I hope part of the reason why CHARM-ED came to support this partnership. And as I say, potentially that I believe in the ripple effect that small numbers of teaching staff can make huge impacts if they have enough support and a community, if you like, to engage with in order to address enacting ESD. CHARM-ED, CHARM-ED, I think Sylvia has introduced this very nicely. We are 3. We obviously will be totally open to the others in the CHARM-EU network, but I wanted to list the partners, the specific project partners, Mihaela and Christina from Barcelona, and Attila Andrea, and of course Sylvia, our host today, and really a gem of a linchpin for the project for us. Many people in Trinity will be very used to this name Sylvia because we have a Sylvia in Trinity who is likewise at the heart of CHARM-EU. I wanted to put up the CHARM-EU vision because it just speaks to a lot of what those of us in ESD are about. That notion that it embraces the change needed to meet society's challenges. If there's a bigger challenge than ESD or sustainable development or the sustainability issues. You know, there are lots of big challenges in the world, but that certainly is right up there. And CHARM stands for somebody who isn't quite familiar with the whole network, challenge-driven. ESD is a challenge, accessible, research-based, mobile European university. And that notion, and of course I've only taken an extract from the vision and values there, but very much focused on identifying and solving specific challenges in close collaboration with the broader community. So I see it as a big picture around education for sustainable development in higher education. And one little slice of that is supporting teachers or teaching staff, those engaged in teaching in higher education, to upskill enough to become comfortable to engage in these challenges. And to pop up as well for those of us new to CHARM-EU, CHARM-EU has 10 very specific educational principles. And when I first saw them, I didn't need to go beyond the first 3 to realize that in particular, this theme of worldviews, perceptions and values in our overarching module certainly had an alignment. Not that any of the 10 isn't absolutely core, but of course this notion of transnational and intercultural learning, Trinity alone can't necessarily do that in the way that this opportunity to engage and partner with Barcelona and Budapest gives us. Outline, I think we've covered that. I'm going to introduce and provide background. I've done a little bit of it there in the introductory comments. Emphasize that UNESCO had been quite core. It was in our reference to it, and the Sustainable Development Goals, etc., are very much embedded in Trinity for a considerable period of time. It's in our national strategy, very much in EU strategy, and it gives us that grounding in global issues and global approaches. And of course, then this notion of worldviews, perceptions and values. And by the time I get to that, you should have a sense to see that middle theme of 5 in the overall module. And of course, the big thing to encourage discourse, debate, insight sharing. So please get those comments, insights, questions, reflections into the chat box. If we don't get through them all today, we'll do so following the webinar. I've chosen to give you the exact sort of, you know, when you do these applications and you're asked to do a quick 200-word, what are you about, to share that with you. And I'll show this slide again later just to keep me grounded in it as well. So the primary aim is to enable staff to experience experiential learning, and that sense of understanding from the inside as a teacher in order to be able to take it further and integrating to teaching. The student-centered, action-oriented and transformative approaches envisaged in UNESCO's preferred pedagogical approaches. So that's integrated. There could have been other pedagogical approaches integrated, but we use those student-centered, action-oriented and transformative, and they fit very well with CHARM-ED, as it turns out. No surprise there. So this will include adaptation of resources already available. And again, we've moved on in 2025 that there are lots of resources on the Centre for Academic Practice website, but in particular, an adaptation of some of the resources used by the fellows in piloting and trying to get this initiative going in Trinity. And the aim is building on the experience of Barcelona and Budapest and experience in Trinity as well, of course. Could we create this to micro-credential format and therefore generalize it or make it more widely available? Focus on worldviews and values is one of 5 themes, and the case study is mining in the Congo, hence my introductory comments, prepping you for the fact that Mariam Yabo, one of the interns very much at the heart of developing this, will be one of our main speakers in webinar 2. And the aim there is to drive learners to question their worldviews, perceptions and values. So you create into your case studies dilemmas where it's not a straightforward, what do I do next, from 3 different perspectives, from the community perspective, policymaker and corporate bodies. And of course, the whole idea is, because we're about developing teaching practice, that having experienced the workshop as a learner, that the teacher or the attendee includes, the whole process includes facilitated exploration of the theoretical underpinnings of the approaches used, so that you can support teaching practice from an informed perspective. As I say, we didn't start in a vacuum. So we began in 2023 under the then strategic plan in Trinity, which very much supported and had as its goal achieving sustainable and a healthy planet. Within that, and 2023 to 30 sustainability strategy, and you'll see right in the center of that photo there, our VP of Biodiversity and Climate Change, Jane Stout, a busy lady, but even the image sort of captures that notion that everything the sustainability strategy tries to achieve is done on a partnership basis. And that notion that we are looking for a holistic, integrated and health-focused way to protect and restore our planetary home for future generations. And what strikes me and is really encouraging is that a few weeks back, our new provost, launched our new strategy, because of course we're now 25 and we want something to take us from 25 to 50. And again, absolutely at the heart of it is the whole notion of sustainability, and it blends and marries and partners with the existing sustainability strategy very well. I've given you the link there, and we'll follow up afterwards. But the key, I think another indicator of where this institutional support is effective is our Provost does a monthly update of a key theme. And in November, the one was our Professor James Stout giving us an update on where the sustainability strategy is at. And of course, old strategy in Trinity to 25, new strategy just blended beautifully. So also Jane Stout and obviously Provost Office, that is available as a recording. And anyone who wants an update of how Trinity got to where it is now and how we've moved on, that's there and available for you. And of course, the whole background was that we looked to transform learning environments as a key strategy. And I've given you two photos there of improving biodiversity on campus. And one is at the external of the front gate in Trinity, which used to be, I would call it a prim managed grass area with the edges cut to within an inch of their lives. And a number of years ago, Trinity chose to, in a very managed, planned way, turn it into a wildflower meadow. It still generates debate. To me, of course, that and the other photo is within our Provost Garden. We have introduced a pond. And that importance to me isn't just about improving biodiversity on campus, which of course is important, to me, it's about external messaging, one to the outside world, and that so many years later we can still have debate, oh, Trinity should go back to cutting its lawn and explaining to people again and again, no, this is what we need, this is linked to the storms we're having and the climate change. And the Provost Garden, I choose that pond because my hobby for decades, and many of my friends were interested in gardening. We call it horticulture. But that notion that there's been a fear of having a pond in your garden, there's something unsavory or not quite clean and improper about it. And I think the messaging for the Provost to do that, perhaps that was one of my biases, that my worldview had taken on one route and this speaks to me in a different way. And finally, the education pillar of TCD's sustainability strategy speaks to me when it says all students and teaching staff will be empowered to develop the knowledge, skills and attitudes necessary to act as agents of change. So that could be derived from the educational principles in CHARM-ED. It's not just that we would get to teaching students, but also a recognition that for teaching staff, this is a huge ask. We normally are challenged to teach in a student-centered, action-oriented, fostering transformative learning way using our expertise. In this case, we're being asked to up the ante on how we teach to enable transformation in our learner and do it starting from material that is not within our area of expertise. So empowering staff to develop the knowledge, skills and attitudes is also important. Some staff are absolute experts. Professor James Stout, my colleagues as ESD fellows, but many of us are well-intentioned but not experts. So this piece of it has been wonderfully supported as well in Trinity. And of course, we're all working towards sustainable development within planetary boundaries. Just that I acknowledge, I have included the names earlier, I acknowledge we have our fellows here. We added Claire because Claire Kelly, who happens to be the star performer in the theme we've chosen, exploring worldviews, perceptions and values, because Claire is a psychologist and affiliated with the School of Medicine and is the voice on the recordings for this theme. But happened to join the project after Felix moved back to the School of Law. But I also want to acknowledge that we have a programme director, Pauline Rooney, who is head of the Centre for Academic Practice. We have programme manager, Nicola keeps us on the straight and narrow, and of course our programme sponsor, very much a partnership with James Stout in this heading up the sustainability office as well as everything else. And I mentioned our students earlier, and I just again Amazing young men and women, to think about 15 were interviewed by our lead fellow, Sarah Jane, and 4 made it through. The amount of applications shows that we have an army of interested, informed advocates for this field already. So how did we get there to common module development? The fellows were asked to come back to the team with a plan. One of a 10-point plan was the idea of this module. The steering committee in Trinity said, go for it. That was early 23. We had our fellows by October. We have some photos here where our interns by October. Our interns, Mariam and William, here on this particular module, beta testing with volunteers from across college. We never had a problem getting a full group in the room. And we piloted it then with staff. We had about 40 odd, May to July. And this photo was taken the middle of July when most people are gone on holidays. I have circled here Nora Campbell, who is module coordinator for the business school. You'll meet in the third. Her right-hand man here. Declan coordinates all the workshops, and we have James Stout here. But just to make that point that there's a large group of people here, and in each of the courses, as we rolled out to staff, many of them are taking pieces of it. You don't have to necessarily take the whole thing. Obviously, it's fantastic what the Trinity Business School have done, but many of those have been and continue to seek to embed in curriculum in one form or another. The key competencies for sustainable development are embedded. These, I'm sure most people on the call are very familiar with those. UNESCO 2017 also lists the 3 the preferred pedagogical approaches. And just to mention that, as I'm sure many institutions in the partnership have institutional graduate attributes. So this is our institutional commitment that every undergraduate receiving a degree from Trinity will be able to think independently, communicate effectively, develop continuously, and act responsibly. So that's the background, and sort of trying to contextualize it, hand, heart, and mind. And if questions arise for you, it's a lot to try and cover in a short period of time. But just pop them in the chat, and as I say, if we don't get to them today, we will get to them after the fact. The next number of slides have lots of text on them and lots of type. It's important to make them available to anyone viewing the video, but I don't intend to go into detail on the other aspects of that outline or overarching enacting education for sustainable development module. Suffice to say that as fellows, we believed there were several aspects that needed to be addressed in order to give a cogent, coherent overview and approach. And I think of me in 2023, where I thought, gosh, I'd like to contribute something to here. I'm sure I have something to contribute. And we're like, oh, this thing is A, more complex than I expected. B, it's moving very fast and the wrong direction. C, the information has been out there for decades, 50 years, 70 years. How was I not more aware, etc.? So this speaks to me, and it was a collaborative, but I would acknowledge Carlos Walker, one of our fellows, who particularly had this big picture view. So the 5 themes are exploring sustainable existence, the bit around systems complexity, the one we're focusing on in this project. You move to problem framing and sustainability, which is familiar to us all at this stage, and misinformation, and that final one includes that notion of advocacy and upstream influencing, and Healthy Trinity is a sort of a specific subset of our sustainability office in Trinity, headed by Martina Mullins, and very strong on that. So I'm just going to whip through them to explain that we target it, we see it as a novice level module, whether it's for staff or students. There are 5 blocks we talk about. We're calling them themes in this project that could be delivered as a whole. or perhaps we could have a number of modules in a program and different module leaders would take different parts of it, but knowing they're part of a more complex whole. We aligned one learning outcome with each of top blocks themes 2 to 5 in the belief that the introductory one would be beneficial to anyone as a standalone, and therefore our learning outcomes we linked because we have 4 Trinity graduate attributes, one with each. That doesn't have to be the case, but it actually grounded us, made it a bit more challenging, but there we go. Why we included it, I've talked about that in terms of alignment, but we did want to be able to deliver to small or large numbers, and therefore the notion that we could do it in a room with 15 or 17, which the business school will talk to you about, or in a larger room with lots of small groups of 15 working in the same room. In that way, you need students as partners. So if your PhD students tend to facilitate workshops, they also need to be upskilled. A word of clarification, when we talk about a 5 ECTS module, we refer to it as 100 to 125 hours of effort. If it's a bigger number of ECTS, etc. So separate block or team like we're doing would represent somewhere about 20 to 25 hours of effort. So 5 hours of contact time, and that's how you build from there. It's all aligned with Kate Raworth's donut representation of planetary boundaries on the outside, the notion we have ecological ceilings. If we breach those, we're in danger of interfering with planetary integrity. And then we have social foundations, and Kate Raworth's 12 social foundations are integrated to the module as a whole. You can see we're mentioned the first one, what is sustainability, food, water, energy, and health are prioritised. The block or theme we're dealing with, worldviews, perceptions, and values, are aligned with social equity and gender equality. So a lot of the material, and you'll see when you look at Claire Kelly's videos, that she's very strong on bringing those themes through, as well as the material related to specifically, for example, mining in the Congo. The first one is called Limits to Growth. You get a sense here of what the content is about. It's Carlos came up with this fishing game, and of course the whole water, the connection of international waters, but there are limits to growth and overfishing, and it's a game, very simple game to get the message in at a deep internal personal level if you engage with that game. The second workshop is around the nitrogen, the notion of sustainable food future. So if you're looking for a complex system as an example, each of these has effectively 2 lectures, 2 1-hour lectures, 1 2-hour workshop, and an optional tutorial. So the pre-work related to this, of course, would include some understanding of the nitrogen cycle and the huge impact nitrogen has for good and for ill on our environment. The block, which I'll talk in much more detail, that is the focus of our project work, takes us to mining for cobalt in the Congo and the social equity issues related to that. The underpinning, one of our perspectives is Jane, a mother of 2, one of whom's a 12-year-old daughter, all 3 of them working in the mines, and that in sort of integration, threading of gender equity issues into what the workshop activities seek to do. So we'll come back to that one in a few moments. Block 4, about problem framing and sustainability, a lot more very much led by our fellow John Gallagher. Infrastructure, social tensions, and environmental vulnerabilities are the perspectives taken in the workshop, and therefore the lectures delivered and the recordings, of course, prepare people for all of that. And of course, in Ireland, I'm guessing in many of the other CHARM-EU Alliance countries, housing is the issue for young people. The climate migrants, rising seas is part of the pre-work because this particular case looks at climate migration further to sea level rise. And the fifth is around vaping, because health, of course, is one of it's threaded through all of some health issues. And this again, choice of topic in all three of these, 3, 4, and 5, were absolutely driven by our interns. They knew better than we did what needed to be done. And the perspectives here are lifestyle influencers, communications executive, and a student union representative, looking to create an upstream goal which could address misinformation. So very much again, hands-on. Now for this particular project, we're choosing the middle block right now. And that slide is there to remind us that when we look at those 5 holistically, systems thinking, your nitrogen cycle, anticipatory is always challenging that future thinking, even when we compare these with the Trinity graduate attributes and the underpinning elements of those, that futures thinking piece, that Brundtland quote, what is sustainable development? Meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. That notion of thinking of those that come after us rather than only being on the plane of those that are here right now. Very challenging one. So it's integrated throughout, and you see even in the case study for the mining in the Congo, we've tried to just integrate a tiny little piece of that thinking everywhere. But I hope you can see that the others are all within the composite of the 5 blocks. So the CHARM-ED project then, to spend a few minutes saying what we have, where we've got to, etc. So we now have videos as open education resources within the website in Centre for Academic Practice. We have guidance for educators using the resources. In other words, to turn them into open education resources, they have to be standalone. But student-centered, action-oriented, fostering transformative learning requires teaching practices that are much more interactive. So the guidance notes, and I'll give you 1 or 2 screenshots, go in, look around them, if anybody wants to ask about them. And that resource guide puts tips for teachers as to how they might use even the existing videos from Claire Kelly, and stop the video and what prompt question might you ask at that moment in time. Having a shared language of learning theories, there are so many out there. I have used Millwood 2021 throughout, and I'll explain why, and I just have 1 slide on that. The significance of the Congo as a case study, I think it'll be obvious to most people, but there's a slide in on that. And just a slide to show an extract from the community perspective. Workshop resources are available complete, like everything from session plans and forward, and will be up on the Centre for Academic Practice site as well. I would hope in the near future. But either way, we have them as a team. So in the open education resources, they mightn't be quite crisp views, but I've taken the landing tile from each so that you can see Claire begins with worldviews, we move to attitudes and values, of course, then we ground it in colonialism as a link to Kate Raworth's donut. Then we talk about power privilege, inequality and climate, obviously. And that's, if you remember, one of the Kate Raworth's themes. And then principles of climate justice. You do want a framework as to how you're going to address these wicked problems. Okay, each of the resource guides, of course, begins with 1 page on the whole module, and then a background to the theme, lists what your videos are, does include all of them a page around the UNESCO preferred pedagogical approaches. I know it off by heart, it's page 55 in UNESCO 2017, but we have it in there, and we have linked each of the descriptions by UNESCO of learner-centered approach, etc., with 4 of Millwood's learning theories. There's nothing absolute about that, but was to pick 4 and say, well, you could use this, and therefore teaching practice here might particularly speak to that. And it can be, I mean, it's fine for me. I've had 10 years in the Centre for Academic Practice, and, you know, my PhD is immersed in this, but this can get a little bit discombobulating is the word we use otherwise. That's just an extract from the resource for teaching. So here, in that, just taking it out of the page, the video part 2, the time, 5 minutes and 11 seconds. what might you do? I might stop that if I have a class in front of me or online and use the prompt question. We talk about care and share, etc. So that notion of how you do it, and we straight away put in, well, you could do that in person. You could also do it with synchronous online teaching. And you can see here an idea for learner-centered approach action oriented learning. And I always put in fostering transformative learning. Transformative learning isn't necessarily a theory. Transformation is what happens to the learner, and therefore that question and the links and everything are all there. Just pop that in for you because this is the image from Richard Millwood. Why do I feel it fits? Well, it derives from a European project. And that notion of, it's the Hotel European project from 1212 to 1214, but Richard keeps updating it. So this, for example, is version 7, 2021. You can go online and it's an interactive page. So I just pulled out a few there because, of course, constructivism, individual constructivism, social constructivism, situated learning, and the concept of scaffolding, those supports we give during the learning process through the activities we use in the workshops, for example, or the teaching prompts, are so vital to being able to believe we're doing something about fostering transformative learning rather than learn to the test. So that's there for that information. That's an extract from the page on the action-oriented learning. And you can see where, and these are all linked to Millwood's map. And that's just my suggestion. Others might pick different ones to go with each of the preferred pedagogical approaches from UNESCO. But that's how it's formatted. And then to come back for a moment or for a few moments to the workshop 3 cobalt mining session, the notion that there are 3 perspectives. Students then must rate and rank 12 potential action options, i.e. behavior related. If we saw someone doing this, how would we react to there? If we saw someone doing this, would it make us believe that action, that behavior is defensible or not defensible? And we have a scale of 4 there. And the students, of course, they're in 3 groups of 5 in their set. They each take a perspective, and then we look to get them to compete in the second half of the workshop by making a pitch to a unit officer with money to give away. And you can see where, again, linked in some notions around the teaching pedagogies. Significance of Congo as a case study, because I do want to acknowledge Mariam and William. William at that stage was a final year med student, and they just were a wonderful interaction with each other and a huge impact on choice and the way these cases developed. But the ethical concepts, values, contradictions and biases in the context of sustainability was actually very easy to weave in through the case they talked about. They really made us think about colonial legacies and intergenerational justice, not only as a looking back point of view, but intergenerational justice looking forward, and therefore directly speaking to that anticipatory futures thinking UNESCO competency that I mentioned earlier as being a challenging one for all of us on the team. We thought, okay, we really have to pay attention to this. And they also particularly looked at the interconnectedness of local and global issues. I've just pulled a piece, the community perspective, because to understand the underpinning theory, you can see it's very short. It's between 200 and 350 words, could be turned into a 1-minute video clip as we've done in many cases across Trinity before. When we talk about action options, so that notion that I've just pulled out for at random here from the 12, that what Jane might do is, when the strike is going on, stay home, influenced by the fact of feeling guilty for breaching solidarity. But if you've no money to even pay the rent, go back to the work along with your children, so bring them back into the unhealthy environment. What's the alternative? Look for work in the local brothel. This really caused reaction. But you can't food and you can't pay your rent. And of course, sneak into the mines at a night to steal some minerals so you can sell for income. And that notion that there have to be action options in there, none is meant to be ideal, That principle of, I've just pulled out solidarity, intention with duty of care to your children, responsibilities to not steal, etc., etc. These things are not easy. So the process is that all learners, be they our staff or otherwise, must rate, is it each one highly defensible, etc., each of the 12, and then rank them into the 3 best and the 3 worst in order of preference. It's a discombobulating, unsettling experience to have to do, because you think none of them is ideal. But it sets you up then to work with a group of 5 or 6 others and be forced to agree a ranking. And that unpacks, without anyone externally involved, much more powerfully unpacks where your biases and where my worldview is curtailed. And I learned so much from our ESD interns going through this process. Just to give you, we've talked about this, that the inclusions in the workshop resources include all of that, and the need to make sure they're available both as PDF and Word, so that people don't have to reinvent the wheel. And then I'm not going to, deliberate on the underpinning theory. Yes, it was a PhD done late in life, so very much building on 20 years of working in a community pharmacy, and that notion that all of us, all of the time, are constantly trying to reason through ambiguity. And we want to do it in an ethically defensible manner, but how do you build the skills? How is it possible to build the skills? And I met with a wonderful mentor in Steve Thoma, who's one of the originator of this theory. A long story, but that notion, you can build the skills to reason through ambiguity in an ethically defensible manner. Higher education can help you to do that. And once you develop those skills, you can lose them if you don't constantly nurture them. And they do not exist in isolation of the other 3 components in terms of behaving in a way that you'll be able to look back in future years and say, okay, it wasn't great, but I made the best decision I could at that point in time. And if I need to change anything now, I can use the same technique and system to say, well, the beliefs and values that served me well back then need to be given a bit of a poke to deal with the new situations we now find. So the key thing I have here is a little bit about the method. I've talked about it, we've actually introduced it. The fact that it's one of 4 components. As Penn and Al would say, that the key things, if you want to develop the skills for moral reasoning through ambiguity, you need logic or a framework, you need to be forced to role play, and you need peer interaction and debate. Okay? Not to be told, someone like me telling my 4th or 5th year pharmacy students or the staff in the staff development module, you need that scaffolding and created environment for peer interaction and debate, and the sequencing of activities drives development. So we talked about this. You have to have a dilemma. You have to be forced to do some independent thinking. You have to be forced to decision make through ambiguity. And then, having made the independent decisions, task-driven peer discussion and debate. So the 4 components are moral sensitivity. Do I recognize there's a dilemma in the first place? Moral reasoning, one aspect of which is the intermediate concept measure. Moral motivation, so I might recognize the dilemma, I might have all the skills of reasoning through ambiguity, but I might have dishonorable intentions. And moral implementation is, do I have the character to act? And those experts on the call, many of you I know, experts in psychology and educational psychology, you're never going to get more than about 50% prediction of how people will actually behave. But you can impact, and these 2 derive about 20% each of the predictability. And these are the 2 that particularly are amenable to being addressed in curriculum design. The logic, role play, and peer interaction that I talked about for Penn, learn frameworks. So ESD competencies of the 17 SDGs, they're each a framework. The educational principles in CHARM-ED, the value system in CHARM-ED, they're all frameworks. We might choose, depending on our context, to ground in any of those. I've given you the reasons why we've gone with ESD and kept it as a holistic whole. Role play, this is about curriculum design and about managing the room and the learners and that every learner engages. And in actual fact, once you get them involved, the room, the dynamic in the room can be dynamic and can be powerful. And our second key speaker at the second webinar is David, and he's again, I'll explain at the time, it has had a huge impact on me. And peer interaction, driving peer interaction and debate, that really getting your heart, soul and mind, your head, heart and hands involved in it is about curriculum design and your teaching practices. We've talked about this. I want to acknowledge it comes from Bibo and Toma. And Steve, as I say, you can see 2017. I finished that PhD in 2015. The sequencing matters. So you begin by forcing individual consideration of the dilemma. You rate and rank the options, and then this piece is critical. Small groups. If the groups are more than about 5, somebody's voice gets lost. If there isn't some element of supervision on the peer interaction and debate to keep it about the peer interaction, then the output, whatever they've to submit it for an assignment for grading, can become too important, and they lose the learning and the development of the reasoning competencies. Again, linking it back to the notion of action learning, discussion of what's not defensible is the greatest learning they'll do. So if a student chooses something that a range of experts say ought to be one of the best, and if a student chooses that one as the worst, or vice versa, a non-defensible item as a best, then that student may well have a blind spot that this discussion and debate helps unpack, helps shine a light on. And the final piece there is, again, keeping the link with the pedagogical approaches in UNESCO. For those of you on the line who I know are particularly interested in curriculum design and why you might do it one way and how you might demonstrate to others on your program team, this is actually linked to learner-centered, action-oriented and transformative learning. Okay, I want to just put one page of references there because there's a lot of theory in that piece. But of course, the references and links for the actual body of the module and the Centre for Academic Practice are on the slides there. If I see any questions related to those, I'll pop links in as we go. And Sylvia, I am going to leave it at that. I'm just making sure our acknowledgement slides goes up there, and I will stop sharing and you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Cicely, for this very inspiring lecture on your work, which is really great and interesting for all of us, I think. We have for now one question in the chat, which I'm going to read out loud. It's by Robert Kortz, but I will also enable Robert's microphone and camera, if that's okay with him, so that you can discuss the answers to his questions right away. And Robert has actually 2 questions up front. The first one is, how do you plan to navigate the issue that colleagues, instructors in many disciplines will find it hard to see relations between their teaching content and objectives and sustainability?
That's a very interesting question, Robert. I would call it a very top-level societal issue. And it is, I think, a strength and a problem in academia where many instructors are absolute experts in their field, and the students may well have a view that they have come to access that expertise when they come to higher education. So, of course, the teaching content and objectives that all of our colleagues currently prioritize in their work as teachers, of course, that remains core and important. In order to see the relations between their teaching content and sustainability, I think that's fundamental. Is it institutional policy in a way that there is almost a living lab in the institution we're in? I mentioned the two photos of the wildflower meadow out onto College Green outside Trinity. That notion of immersing yourself and that sustainability and sustainable development are part of our world. They're existential challenges. But me personally, I have this one tiny slice. I present myself as not an expert. I found the first 6 months in this sobering, because I realized how much I didn't know and ought to have known. I don't envisage that every colleague that would even have an opportunity to go through the entire module will see a relation between their teaching context and sustainability. Does that mean they wouldn't help support the global initiative towards upskilling the next generation? Or will the next generation of students be the ones to drive any of us who haven't just yet engaged as teachers to do so? Have you any thoughts? I see you've turned on your camera there, Robert.
Thank you for this response. I mean, I don't know any thoughts, but seeing the challenge with this at UAB and together with colleagues from Sweden, we have taught and we have organized a course this year where we talked about interdisciplinary competences with instructors, with our colleagues. And even when you talk about the interdisciplinary competences, so that they can, basically in theory, they are easy to implement or to aim for in basically all university teaching and all university courses. Even there, many colleagues really have these challenges to connect to their, a colleague from law, a colleague from chemistry. Maybe in the natural sciences a bit easier, possible. Maybe in some humanities it's a bit easier, but that this was part of my background. And then I see also, of course, what you say with the Congo case, for instance. I mean, I would say that it kind of affects all disciplines, right? Or all disciplinary backgrounds. But I don't know. I'm still struggling with this a bit.
Okay. I think, Robert, and I know Sylvia has other questions and maybe other people want to come in, but I think your comment about interdisciplinary teaching, I certainly, after 10 years working with the Centre for Academic Practice, that's always been there. We have expertise in our area. We have a responsibility to students who enrolled in a program, for me, to become a pharmacist, to get what they need for that. So I'm not for a moment saying that has ever been easy or it's going to be easy in this. But it was an amazing experience, but a grim 6 months with the fellows in that early stage, because they were all immersed in this from their perspective. And yes, we ended up with a module, not intending it to be perfect from a beautiful curriculum design point of view, but a coming together. And that has flowed out, and you're going to meet some of those people in webinar 2 and 3. So it can be done. I think I come from a faculty of health sciences. So we have to teach interprofessional education and interprofessional learning. So there's a little piece of that, and it's still not easy. Does that sound, and rather than going into the detail of the Congo case and where I see the links and etc., I think it's one piece of it, because you've hit the nail on the head. The changing of worldviews, perceptions, and biases or values, that's not external to us as teachers. We have worldviews. I have worldviews that have been seriously challenged in the last couple of years in a way they needed to be, but not in an easy way. Is that okay? Okay, offering a designated ESD module could create the impression that ESD is something extra special. I absolutely agree with you. And I think Robert also is touching on this. This is enacting education sustainable development with our focus being on teaching practice. And the notion, exactly as everybody's touching on, how can I be expected to either teach sustainable development or interact with the student who's asking me a question from someone's expertise in one aspect of the education for sustainable development? So perhaps a student is asking me a question that comes very much from the science-informed planetary boundaries piece, and I'm from humanities, very much immersed in Kate Rowmott social. So in order to, I teach professionalism and ethics, it's my label. So how can you be an appropriate facilitator of learning for students if you haven't been given the opportunity at some level to have a little bit of insight to them all and to have made connections with colleagues? So as if I feel, okay, this cohort of students could really do with a full session on the science, that I might ask a colleague. And to me, the ideal would be I'm open to then, and I'm facilitated in the university's structure to then go and do an equivalent session with that person, with their students. It's not easy. I'm not saying that fits in with progression and awards or budgeting in higher education, but you're asking one of the nub questions. So to me, the second big thing I got from that first 6 months with the other fellows was, it wasn't all grim and doom and gloom. It really was, this decade matters. And we have direct access to tens of thousands of young people. And I have it to a person. They're absolutely engaged with this. And they are open, active minds. If the ability to advocate could be a little bit more informed by something I do with them and the encouragement to get involved, then that ripple effect will have been part of it. I won't necessarily know it. I won't be able to tick it on an audit list or, on a box somewhere. But I suppose it's that's my background as a community pharmacist, supporting me there, and I recognise that. But I certainly would hope, if I find myself in that position, that there would be colleagues who would say, okay, we need to do something here. So even if it's an online lecture, or have you something you'll share with me? In Trinity, there are a number of initiatives. We have a one-day initiative run by the Sustainability Office. We have a module, Quentin Crowley, forgive me, through leadership in climate change. So there are lots of things out there that we can pull on, but we're doing it with colleagues. So if we get stuck, we should have somebody go back and connect with. I think we're just expanding, not just Sylvia, we are expanding the base by having a CHARM-ED project. We're expanding the network of potential colleagues and resources, and maybe they'd have done a video clip here or there. Not easy, not a full answer. Ask me in 50 years' time, maybe I'll have a comprehensive answer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have a few minutes left and one more comment in the chat, which mostly comes in for the first question of Robert on how to engage colleagues who would have maybe the fear of not being there for the field. Andrea Wellich from ELTE, I wonder if you would like to express your comment or explain your comment in person. I have enabled your camera and your mic, but of course I can also read your comment out loud if you want me to.
I wonder if I can you hear me?
Yep, perfectly.
Yep. I'm not at home, so I would not switch on my camera. I apologize, but I'm in a hotel. But I was listening, and I would like to say that I fully agree. First of all, thank you very much for the event, because I think it's very important. Cicely has done a very good job. I personally very much share this dedication. We have a huge responsibility as educators to include the sustainability perspective into our classes. And reflecting on the previous question, I think as fellows, we can also initiate it from our part, that we introduce new type of curriculum or syllabus, that we try to include the SDGs in our own classes. And then I tried to do this in one of my classes, and at the end the students really appreciated it, and they said that now they are less pessimistic about the future than beforehand. And I think it's very important to include this sustainable education perspective. So thank you very much for the initiative, and that's what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you very much, Andrea. We have one more comment in the chat by Michaela Vancea of the University of Barcelona, although she had to leave for now, so I will just read it out loud. Probably giving it another title, avoiding the development concept, might be a solution for a more overarching dissemination strategy and a more critical approach.
I think that's a very interesting comment, because it has come up so many times. The question of whether it's education for sustainability, sustainable education, education for sustainable development, it's out there. And in actual fact, this year I had time with the Danish School of Education, thanks to Erasmus, and Susan Wright there was one of the co-chairs of the core documentation, where they debated at length this topic. And in the Nordic countries, they do talk about education for sustainability. So absolutely recognize that's out there, and part of the education principles for CHARM-ED and CHARM-EU include that notion of generalizability to other jurisdictions. Let me explain why we are very clearly using education for sustainable development in Trinity. Apart from the project, the project is something we're going to do together. So education for sustainable development is the terminology used in UNESCO. And as earlier mentioned, we derive from local, national, European, and international by using UNESCO. And the UNESCO terminology around sustainable development, and it's simplistic, I know, to just use one quote, but it does come from Brundtland's quote around meeting the needs of the present while not compromising the needs of future generation, as being what UNESCO means by sustainable development. So if I can explain that, then and that rider is put in there, that I know there are multiple other ways of talking about it. The one thing we were concerned about sustainability in education was, in many definitions, sustainability in a generic way is, we're going to keep the program going next year and in 5 years' time. Is the institution going to be here next year and in the 5-year time? Which didn't keep us grounded in curriculum and teaching practice, which was our core focus. Okay, is that, and Sylvia, I know that was Mihaela, is it? Yeah, so
yes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Cicely. We are running out of time, so I would suggest to conclude today's webinar. If you allow me, I will share my screen quickly so that you can save the date for the upcoming 2 webinars.